So, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's talk. Today, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Tom Platt. I head up the e-commerce sector of Netacea, work closely with a wide range of our e-commerce customers around the globe. I'm also joined today by Mark Greenwood, our Chief Technical Architect. Today, we're essentially going to be talking a little bit about bots before we go into what it takes for someone to launch a credential stuffing attack and just why it's so difficult for businesses to spot this and how they tend to evade sort of traditional methods of detection. And then we'll end with a quick summary. So just to sort of touch on the first topic, what is bot traffic? Essentially, I think everyone's aware, if they work in online businesses, that an element of their traffic will be bots. Here at Netacea, we define bot traffic as any sort of non-human visit to a web page, essentially any sort of task that's been set up by a human to be conducted in an automated manner. Really important that we call out at the start of this, not all bots are bad. There are lots of good bots, there are lots of bad bots out there. And it's a really wide range across very different businesses and different industries. Depending on what sector you're in, you will have different types of bots, and even from some businesses to businesses in the same sector, they can have very different bot traffic on their sites. But I mean, why should we care? What do bots actually mean to businesses? And what we tend to see at Netacea, regardless of what sector anyone's in or what type of business we're working with, we can only expect anywhere up to sort of around 53% of web traffic to be generated by bots. Of course, that's a mix of good and bad. But then, interestingly, we can see up to 9 out of 10 login attempts being made by bots, and that's certainly something we see as definitely malicious traffic. So I think regardless of what sector you're in or what type of business you operate, I think it's fair to assume that there will be a portion of your visitors on your websites, your apps and your APIs that come from bots, and it's really important that you understand that. In terms of what the industry guidelines are on bots, and this is where it gets really interesting. So OWASP, sort of the governing body in this space, effectively categorize bots and their attacks as abusive functionality. OWASP have a wealth of recommendations and information on all sorts of different areas, but what is particularly interesting when it comes to bots is there is not a specific or agreed framework yet within industry on how to deal with them. With the exception of building better applications and writing better code. Effectively, it's very challenging for businesses, I think, that there just isn't a framework at the moment in the marketplace for how people should go about dealing with bots. And what's really interesting is when we look at it, OWASP categorized 17 different types of automated threats that bots can pose. And they all fall under this abusive functionality for which there is no framework of how to deal with them. But you look at other types of attacks, more common things that we see like vulnerability scanning and denial of service attacks. And these are very, very sort of well-known common sectors where there's a lot of research and knowledge on how to deal with those. But what we do see is there's this wealth of different types of attacks that make up abusive functionality. That certainly there isn't really a common way for people to deal with. And here at Netacea, we've done an independent piece of research where we looked at lots of different businesses, asking them what they thought about bots and what bot traffic meant to them. It's really interesting that, of the businesses and the people within those businesses that we interviewed, you can see large proportions of the people that we interviewed definitely saw that card fraud, credential stuffing, and scraping attacks were a big risk to them. But equally, what was very interesting was that only 1 in 10 of the people that we interviewed felt that there was a single owner in their business for bots. And typically, what we saw is the bot problem tends to transcend over 3 and sometimes 4 different departments within a business. So it's certainly a wide-ranging problem. And I think when you compile these things together, what we have is a space where there are lots of different threats. As you can see, OWASP have outlined 17 different threat types that bots can cause. There's obviously lots of bot traffic in general, be it good or bad. And equally, businesses currently don't have a known way to deal with this, or a known sort of department within a business that's typically responsible for dealing with bots. So all of this really does make it quite difficult as a business to sort of start to think about how we manage and control bot traffic on our websites, platforms, and APIs. What I'm going to do now we sort of just discuss bots in the realm and all of the different types of attacks we see, is I'm going to pass over to Mark Greenwood. Mark's going to talk in a little bit more depth about the key focus of today, which is credential stuffing attacks.
So when we're talking about credential stuffing, what we mean is when a set of usernames and passwords are validated against a website. Usually these have been breached from another site, so bearing in mind the target of the attack isn't generally the sort of original source of the breach, so this is an inherited risk from other websites being breached elsewhere on the internet, and really exploiting where people use the same username and passwords in multiple places. So we've just got this scenario on at the top of the slide here. So usernames and passwords are breached from site A, and then sort of validated against site B to see where their users have reused those credentials in multiple places. So this really is an inherited risk from site B's point of view. And it's the use of bots that facilitate attacks at scale. So obviously, we'd hope it'd be the minority of credentials in that original breach that will be reused in multiple places. So in order to find those, we really have to, the attacker needs to try lots and lots of different credentials to find the valid ones in those large lists. So one area we can get some data on this is the website Have I Been Owned? So this keeps tracks of sort of public lists of username and passwords. And we can see at the bottom here, they're tracking currently 10 billion breached credentials in the wild that anyone can try against any website. And you could do this manually, but when we're talking at that sort of scale, we really need bots to facilitate doing this, those sorts of quantities, because it becomes unmanageable to do sort of manually. So if we look at the anatomy of a sort of a credential stuffing attack, we've got our email and password list, or credit card information, or whatever it is we're stuffing, and some script to run that through and identify the valid ones in those lists against a new website. And it's that we can use then to facilitate further identity theft or fraud or theft of other sort of useful stuff that's in those accounts on those websites. So just to take a look at what that might look like in action, I guess, from a webmaster's point of view. This is one example of a credit card validation attack. So this was a list of credit card numbers that were fired against a payment portal in an attempt to find out which ones could be used, not necessarily on this website, but more in general, just to validate that those were valid credit card numbers. So there was, in this case, there was 308,000 card validation attempts in this attack over a 24-hour period. So it is sustained automated behavior running through that list of card validation of credit card numbers to find the valid credentials that could be reused. And similarly with username and password combinations. So in this attack, there were 27 million login attempts over a 67-hour period. Again, a sustained attack, obviously automated to try at that sort of rate. And for that length of time, but it was a sustained attack, just stuffing those random username and password combinations breached from other websites against this particular site to see which ones have been reused and could then be used to facilitate further fraud. So that's what credential stuffing looks like in action. What does it mean for companies, I suppose, when they're subjected to this kind of attack? So one high-profile instance is the Dunkin' Donuts case. So this was a credential stuffing attack. So this wasn't Dunkin' Donuts specific vulnerability, but they were hit with a large credential stuffing attack. And what we wanted to point out really is that this is misuse of legitimate authentication functionality. As Tom was saying before, This is functionality that websites need to provide to authenticate legitimate users, but coupled with this data that's been gotten through ill means, we've got an illegitimate use of this legitimate functionality. And accounts were breached for Dunkin' Donuts website, where they track their loyalty scheme. So when you make purchases through there, you can build up loyalty points to get further benefits from them. And it's fair to say that the target is not always obvious. A lot of the time when we're talking about breaching accounts, we're talking about trying to grab PII or money or tangible things like that we often try to protect. It's fair to say that the people that designed the Dunkin' Donuts loyalty scheme may never have assumed that these points would have a dollar value on the internet, where accounts that have been breached are resold so that you can buy cheap donuts on someone else's dime. So it's fair to say that other loyalty schemes are subjected to similar attacks with similar motivations, and they're not the only kind of targets of these attacks. There's plenty of ways to monetize this kind of attack. But what was the impact on this particular business? So Dunkin' Donuts have been taken to court over this attack, and that case has been running for a number of years since this original attack in 2015. It's still in the news. So this last headline on the right here was just at the end of last year, where this was back in the courts again. So it's really tough to quantify the reputational and financial damage of this kind of attack. It goes way beyond just the original customer service issue, if you like, of dealing with breach credentials and helping people recover their accounts. The reputational and financial damage goes far beyond that, and is very tough to quantify. So it's really important to get a handle on this kind of issue on websites in general, and to understand it and protect against it.
Okay, so great, thank you for that, Mark. So now we've just covered a little bit more about sort of what bots mean to businesses, and in specific there, Mark talked about how anyone can really be the victim of a credential stuffing attack, and just some of the things these attacks are targeting. Now we're going to walk through just how easy it is for someone if they want to from scratch decide that they want to target your business with a credential stuffing attacks, and the steps they can go through. And the barriers to entry, I guess, of running one of those attacks. So if we look at running a credential stuffing attack, one of the first things we're going to need is a tool. So one of the examples of a tool that's kind of out there in the marketplace, it's one of the older ones now, but is one called Storm. You can find a full write-up and review of Storm and its capability on our blogs. But effectively, it's a tool that was written for pen testers to test if sites can stand up to credential stuffing attacks. But it's certainly one we've seen used against people and businesses within the wild. And it has loads of different functionality, but effectively what it allows you to do is put in a list of credentials, target a website, and then enter those credentials into that website at volume. But I think one of the things to point out is these tools, they're not that hard to find. They're not that hard to get. We can see here just a quick Google for Storm as a tool. We look it up, we find it, and you can see very quickly that there are tons of results there. If you click on these, you will find the link and you will be able to download the tool quite quickly. And you've kind of got the first thing you need to run a credential stuffing attack. And I guess what's worth pointing out there is we haven't gone onto the dark web, we haven't paid any money, we haven't done anything with Bitcoin. We have literally just done a little bit of Googling on the open web with some knowledge we have, and we've been able to get ourselves up and running with a tool. Once we've got that tool, the next thing we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need some usernames and passwords. So effectively, how easy you think it could be extremely hard to get usernames and passwords, and these breaches are highly valuable. I guess I would say that some of them are, but certainly there's a lot out there for people using get access to. What we can see here is we've done a quick Google, we've ended up on Twitter, and there's a Twitter account called Check My Dump. It's there completely in public. and all that does is tweak lists to new blocks of credentials that have been updated and added to a service called Pastebin, where you can effectively go onto Twitter each day, check this news feed, see what credentials are out there, and you can grab these lists. Again, we haven't gone onto the dark web. We've used Twitter, we've used Google. We've now got a set of credentials. Not only that, but there's a community around this. It's you have to know these things to, I guess, search for them. But there's more than enough publicly available tutorials on YouTube, as you can see here, on how to get what we call a combo list and where to look for them. So we've kind of got the first two things we need to launch an attack, and so that would be our tool, and we've got some credentials to put into that tool. The next stage is where typically we would see a barrier to entry, where people would need to be technically savvy to configure that tool to target a specific website. But not so much when it comes to credential stuffing. What we can see is that there's a whole host of what we call config files available on the market. This is a forum where you can see all the different types of configs available, some very large businesses that I'm sure everyone's familiar with there. But these are configs specifically written for the tool that essentially, once you have your tool and you have your usernames, you plug in a config for a specific site, and then that tool is already built and up and running, ready to go and target that website. So you can see, just with a little bit of Googling, staying on the public internet and not really spending any money or doing anything too scary with Bitcoin, we're able to get ourselves a tool, a list of credentials, and the setup and configuration for that tool to target a wide range of businesses. We haven't needed to do any coding, and we're kind of up and ready to go. So, I mean, hopefully, that just shows you just how easy it is to launch a basic credential stuffing attack. What I'm going to do now is going to pass over to Mark Greenwood, who's going to talk through, if you're on the receiving end as a business of these attacks, what does it look like, and how can you try and spot them?
Great, yeah. So what we wanted to show was what one of these attacks might look like to someone running a website. So if I just show you this video here, so we've got our login form over on the left-hand side, just accepts a username and password, and some metrics out of the back of it, so we can look at who's logging into the platform, how many times they've tried to log in, where in the world they are. So we've got our target market just within Europe. It's pretty much where all the login traffic comes from, and the functionality behind it isn't too great, but it'll serve the purpose that we've got. And in the top left-hand side of our metrics, we've got the login failure and attempt. So as I mentioned before, you'd expect most login attempts in a credential stuffing attack to fail, because it'll be the minority that have used them credentials in multiple places, or even customers to these two different websites. So this login failure success ratio is a key metric in identifying credential stuffing attacks. We'd expect this to remain fairly consistent. So in this, what we've got is our metrics over on the right hand side, and we've got our credential stuffing script over on the left. So if we kick off this script just by running in our command line, what we'll see is that we'll see those credentials being attempted against our login form. And over on the right-hand side, we'll see the impact and the fact that you can pick this attack out fairly easily. So suddenly there's an uptick in traffic from North America, which we don't usually see on our test website. We've seen that login failure success ratio sort of fires straight up to 1. So nearly every login attempt that's being made on the platform at the moment is failing. And we see that most of the traffic at the moment is coming from that single IP address, and that they're trying lots and lots of different credentials. On the left-hand side, you can see that some of our credentials are being found to be valid on the platform, but that most of them just aren't returning any sort of valid login. So obviously, if I was running this website, we could see this attack fairly obviously and probably take action against it, blocking login attempts from that particular IP address, and sort of bring that attack to a close. What we want to talk about is how someone might hide their attack in plain sight almost, and hide from the kind of metrics we've got set up on the right hand side. So okay, so in this instance, what we've done is the attackers trying to skew that key metric that we've got. So for every unsuccessful login that the script makes, it makes 2 successful logins with credentials that we know work. So this might be an account that the attacker's registered for this purpose ahead of time, just to make a couple of successful logins and keep that failure and attempts ratio in the normal sort of range, and try and prevent that skew so that it doesn't stand out as much. Obviously, in this case, this attack's still just coming from that single IP address that's well outside our target market. So we can still see this attack, and we can still take fairly decisive action against it by blocking that IP address or restricting the access that that IP address has to our systems. Okay. Well, one thing that's sort of happening in the market is that the distribution of attacks from multiple sources is sort of gaining traction, and that there's many of these services that provide large distributed proxy networks for people to sort of mask their attempts visiting target websites. So to be able to distribute the attack across many IPs, but not only that, but hide behind legitimate looking IPs that might be in a target website's target market. In our example, for instance, within Europe. So just looking at these screenshots from one such service, you can you can buy access to one of these networks, hundreds of gigabytes for just $10 per gigabyte. You know, that's quite a lot of login attempts that you could make just relatively cheaply. And they advertise just like 3.5 million residential IPs, so that's IPs in common household ISPs. So 3.5 million IPs just within Great Britain alone. So again, that's a lot of login attempts from legitimate looking IPs. So just playing through that in our toy example, if you like. So assuming that we were using one of these proxy networks and our metric skewing scripts that we went through before, you can see that now this attack that we've got going on, trying hundreds of credentials, will look like a standard day at the office, albeit a busy one. There's lots of login activity on the platform, but it's not obvious where that login activity is coming, and it's not obvious that most of it is failing. So this just looks like a standard day at the office. It would be much tougher to track down the IPs, obviously, because there's more of them, and take action against these nefarious authentication attempts. And that's really what the attackers are trying to do, to hide their attacks and make it tougher to respond to for people running websites.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Mark. Hopefully there we've sort of just covered, you know, just how easy it is, and in fact just quite how scary it is that people can get up and running with a bot attack and targeting a business. You know, we've also talked about, you know, how people can hide these attacks, how difficult they are to spot, and I guess the real challenges that businesses face in terms of, you know, there isn't often a single owner of a bot problem, and there isn't really a standard set way for industries to deal with the bot challenge that we see in the marketplace today. So I guess all of these things added together, the ease of someone being able to launch an attack, the sheer volume of credentials that are readily available out there, and just how sophisticated these attacks are getting, really make this something that businesses need to look at. I think in essence, what we would say is that, you know, every business has an element of bot traffic on their website, and it's essentially, it's just key to get visibility of how much of your traffic is bot and what is that bot traffic doing. Here at Netacea, we effectively use behavioral analysis to identify bot traffic. So we're looking at all sorts of different things to understand if the visitors on your website are bots or if they're humans. And if we do understand that they're bots, then, you know, taking action against those and stopping them causing you any harm. I think Mark's got a few last points of things that, you know, people can do. You know, if you want to protect yourself and your customers from bots, it's probably worth Mark just running through a couple of these points just of things that people can do.
Yeah, so I think there's something that we can all do to prevent being subject to having our credentials breached in an account in an attack like we've seen today. So the first one is not to reuse passwords between different websites. So password managers can help with this. We mentioned a couple here. They can help manage when you've got lots of unique, strong passwords in multiple places. So that's really good practice to use one of those password managers to prevent reuse. Obviously, change your passwords periodically just to keep them fresh, and activate multi-factor authentication wherever possible. So where you get a code text out to you to verify legitimate login attempts, always try and activate that in any account where possible. And we mentioned have I been owned before. You can check whether any credentials you've got have been in any breach. You can check your email address or even your password to see whether that's been in any breach that's been made public. And always be careful what you click and install.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Mark. I think just to close up, hopefully we've shown, why businesses should care about bots, what some of the things that bots do are, and we've gone into a lot of depth here on Credential stuff. And if you want to know anything more about what we do, how we can help, then do get in touch via the website. There are plenty of information there in terms of a broader sort of section of bots and some of the things we see, reports and things that hopefully everyone can find useful. If you do want to take things a step further, as we said, one of the first steps and key things that we think any business should have is at a minimum visibility of how much of their traffic is bots and how much of it is human. And if you'd like to understand that and do some work with Netacea on that, we can happily help and give you visibility. So I think all that's left to do is say thank you to everyone for organising today's talk. Thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for attending. If you want to know any more, please do get in touch. Thank you.